Everybody in here. Oh, sorry guys, I'm 2 minutes late today. Getting everybody in. Welcome, welcome. I know a lot of people that are tuning in. It's a rainy and kind of gross day today. So I hope you're not out on a roof.
It's beautiful here in New York, Ben.
Give it 2 days based on the forecast. We always have your weather 2 days before you, so plan the cookout for tonight and not tomorrow. So let's see. David's in there. Nice. Cool. I am going to try to get this to stream on Facebook. They changed the rules this week, and so let's see where we're at. How's everybody else doing?
I thought we had a really informative session last week. I learned a lot. Very interested in what Kai had to say. He's a pretty talented individual. I spoke with him several times in the last few years, and I'm grateful that one of my customers turned me on to him several years ago. So I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Just a slight recap on it. I consider it one of my greatest tools for problems, and I think he demonstrated what a good tool it could be. So once again, thanks for him. There's going to be times when we do have guest speakers, and I can think of a couple of them now, but one of them will be when, or some of those times will be when new products come out. I've got a couple new products coming out myself, and I have some friends coming up with new products. So we'll try to cover that from time to time also to keep everybody informed of what's going on out there. You getting it put together, Ben?
I'm working on it. It's there's about 18 different opinions on how people say that you can stream it to Facebook. So we warned everybody that you have to join us in the real Zoom. So David, you still got that mic by you?
Yes.
Yeah, pull that a little closer to you.
Okay. All right. That's closer now.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Thanks.
Okay. Got it.
Anybody
While we're waiting for that, this is Chris Hayes. I have Lance Dorfy, my business partner, here for his inaugural Facebook meeting. So
yeah, excited.
Welcome to the group, Lance. I saw that you joined the Facebook group.
Yep, just did. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. Looking forward to it.
Nice.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, it's just a discussion type group. So anything anybody can add, any questions people have, there'll be somebody in the group that can probably help. So I see some of the people in here very successful and very gifted at their portion of the industry. So it's I always said it's a tough industry, so we need to help each other more than a lot of industries. I still say it's easier to be a plumber or electrician or a carpenter than it is to be a radon guy. You face a lot of challenges, and typically if you're doing your work through real estate, which most people are, you're usually working for a customer that doesn't really like you or want you to be there.
Right.
So yeah, and also looking for the cheapest deal they can get and have no concern about anything but the price. So there's plenty of challenges we have besides some of the homes we get into, and it seems like this has been a week that I've had several calls for people with homes that have extremely unusual building techniques or problems that come down to us. And I've always said, look, we're not capable of solving the problems that a home has if it's
Right.
not built to code, if it's not, one of the particular ones that comes to mind, was untrapped drains, leading to some bizarre situation, and the trap was at the sewer instead of at the drains, but it was clay tile leading to those. So it was evident the clay tile was laid just end to end, not even bell fitted. But you got 4 or 5 drains leading to a trap that feeds into a sewer, and I'm like, why should we have to fix the problems that every homeowner wants to build into their own home? That's an extra challenge that we have, and we've all been through that. Everything from pedestal sumps to untrapped drains. I told him a story before I get too far off track. I told him a story of a farmer that I worked for, and he owned 100 acres around him, and he built the home himself. And his numbers were 69 picocuries, and I'm like, well, you're in a area that's more like 7. So there's got to be a reason that you're 69 and everybody else is 7. And so I start looking at his floor drains, and he had 6 floor drains. And I said, well, what's going on here? Not a one of these are trapped. And he says, he said, I got field tile out behind the house, and I thought, why not put some drains in my floor and feed them to that field tile? And he said, I didn't feel like they needed trapped, but he said, in the real dry times of the year, they kind of smell. And I said, well, in the first place, it's sucking radon for 100 acres. But in the second place, the drier it gets, the more it's going to absorb things from the soil. But thirdly, I'll bet you the numbers were also elevated the drier it gets, because the drier it gets, the more ability the radon has to travel. So he said he also had a crawl space behind the garage. So he had 400 square foot crawl space along with this basement. And he says, well, prove it. He says, I'm in no hurry. I've lived here for 50 years, 60 years. Prove it to me. So what I did, instead of duct taping over the drains, I had a bunch of buckets. So I filled buckets with gravel and put them over each drain and said, all right, I'll put a homeowner type radon device in there, and I'll come back tomorrow and we'll see what the numbers are. And bear in mind, they started as 69. And the first thing I told him was, you've got a crawl space and other problems, so I'm not expecting miracles. Well, I went from a 69 to a 16 just by putting buckets over 6 drains. So in other words, that's just an example. A guy that called me this week had the untrapped drain scenario, but
at least the homeowner knew that, he knew the way the house is built. Some people don't no idea, so it helps. Sometimes it helps that.
Right. But when you go to that person, especially if it's a seller, and you say, look, somebody needs to fix these drains. A plumber needs to fix these drains so they're up to code. Of course, that seller doesn't want to hear it because they're interested in getting in and out of there. And so we do get challenges that way. But I know that Ben and I have discussions every week about me getting off track. But we were going to talk just a little bit about crawl spaces this week. All of us get initiated into crawl spaces. And so a lot of us wish there was nothing that existed in the world of crawl spaces. But I always paid the guys a bonus, because I learned right away that whenever you got in the truck to head to a job, and the guys would say, okay, what are we doing this morning? As soon as you said crawl space, there was a look on their face like they were all going to quit. And so I learned early in my career of owning a mitigation company that you got to do something to make those guys quit giving you that look. In my opinion, there's 4 types of crawl spaces. First of all, there's accessible and non-accessible. So we'll talk a little bit about what we try to do in a non-accessible crawl space, because if you can't crawl around in it, you can't crawl around in it. And then there's a combination of partial basement, partial crawl. In my portion of Central Illinois, that's very common. They seem to love to put a crawl space behind the garage in these homes. And then there's the situation where you have all crawl space. Technically, it's the same process on 3 of the 4. But just a little bit about a non-accessible crawl first. What we found to be successful was sealing the crawl as much as possible. Very, very meticulously sealing the crawl from the outside environment as well as from the environment above it. And then we would run a pipe through into that crawl some way or another and put a small type fan. I think a lot of people make the mistake of putting too big of a fan. And I always tell people, we're not trying to mine radon. We're trying to mix the radon that's there, but you put too big of a fan, and I've always felt like you're pulling more in. In other words, I think you can go too far with fan sizes in a crawl space. Also in all crawl spaces, but in a non-accessible crawl space, we're not going to do a lot with a crawl space without using a valve. And this is a gate valve. You know, these are the best type. They're quieter, and they're more designed for air than a ball valve, but they're also a little more expensive. But the thing about crawl spaces and valves is it gives you some adjustment. It gives you the ability to play with it until you can get better numbers. I've seen plenty of times playing with a valve can increase or decrease the picocuries per liter. And I've got a lot of people shaking their head because sometimes maybe it's not as explainable as other times, but it is a fact. And so it gives you flexibility. But we've had good success with non-accessible crawl spaces by sealing them from all environments. Now, some of you might be thinking, if you seal it from the outside air, you're probably increasing the radon, and I agree. But I always said, you also are not trying to mitigate the dog kennel in the backyard. You want to try to restrict what you're mitigating to the portion of the home that's going to affect the people. And so by sealing it from the outside air, at least you've put yourself in a position where your fan is mitigating the environment that matters. And another little hint about them, when you do an all crawl space situation, most times you think, you know, what am I going to do for manometer, paperwork, anything else? Because everything's exterior, especially alarms for those that need to put alarms in. But
hey, David, sorry, I have a question. So when you say seal it from the outside air, are you talking about the crawl space vents?
Yes, crawl space vents, cracks, holes, anything you can do within reason to restrict the crawl space air to the crawl space. And you know, as in most building codes in most areas now, vents to the outside are now become illegal because there's such a energy consuming issue. So now that the world is finally—
Sorry, just to clarify, are you talking about interior like crawl space doors and things like? Are you talking about ceiling like that, or are you talking about on exterior walls?
Well, a lot of these homes, at least that depending on the era they're in, they'll have access doors.
Yes.
And they'll also have places where people have run pipe through and busted out 12 inches of brick in order to get a 4-inch pipe in, things like that. So we spend some time.
We put perforated pipe in if we can't access.
Great idea to give you a little bit more communication line. You know, anything you can do along that line. I think the two things that I'm advocate is remember that every one of these homes that's all crawl space has an equipment room. There's nothing to keep you from putting, if you can access it, there's nothing to keep you from putting most of these non-accessible crawl space have a little bit of accessibility. So if you can run a pipe up into that equipment room, you can also put a cap on that pipe and run that pipe 3 foot high, so that you can have a place for a manometer and it's just, it works for us every time, not necessarily always in a non-accessible crawl space, but it always works in a combination or an accessible crawl space. Many times in an accessible crawl space home that's all crawl space, when I'm expected in Illinois to have a tag, a service tag. You're expected to have a liquid manometers, which don't work outdoors. So we put a T in the line, go up into the crawl space with about 3 feet of pipe, cap it off, and put our manometer and paperwork in the equipment room next to the furnace. Works very good that way. So I'll go back to the non-accessible crawl. Sometimes we take a painter's pole that's extendable. Sometimes in my case, I have one that is used for pool nets. And we've even wrapped 2x2s, 2x4s in the end of a piece of film and just kept pushing until we can get as much as we can. And so I think that many states ask you to do as much as you can. But the bottom line is we feel like you can be more successful if you restrict the air or the mix that you're trying to go up that pipe to the atmosphere that affects the human beings. If you seal it from exterior air, we feel like you get a better product. So we recommend valves to give you ability to adjust if you need to. And we recommend sealing it from outdoor air. And once again, there's going to be people in this meeting going to say, well, wait a minute, those vents and holes to the outside air help the mix to begin with. Well, you're right. If you didn't have a fan that was extracting that mix and you tested the home, there's a high likelihood it would test higher if you closed the vents and sealed the holes without a fan. It's still my belief that when you've got everything sealed and you're pulling from that atmosphere to mix the air and the gases in that atmosphere, you can get a better number if you're not mixing with the outdoor air. So, and I also go back one more time and say, I still say some people make the mistake of using too big a fan. My experience and my opinion is that you don't want to mine radon. You want to work within the radon that's in that crawl space. And too big of a fan also brings more through the earth. That's my own feeling. And so if it's an accessible crawl, then of course, all your crawl space rules apply. And what I said about running a leg off of your system up into the equipment room works very good because it encourages the consumer to look at their manometer more, because they're always going to be changing the filter on their furnace, possible water filters. A lot of things will make a consumer go into their furnace, water, and hot water heater area that would normally a person wouldn't look at their manometer. So we'd love to find a way to do that, and simply a 3x3 T and a cap is all you need to make that happen.
Sometimes the gauge doesn't. Oh,
Go ahead. Yeah,
sometimes the gauge doesn't read much vacuum pressure because you have a perf pipe in the crawl space. So we've done that before, and it's very hard to tell the differential on the gauge. So I guess that's where the gate valve comes into play, right? You can kind of.
Well, and that's a good point. It's a good point because I preach about the value of a manometer in reading fan sizing, but you do affect the value of a manometer when you do this. But the minute you leave that home, the only value of a manometer is for the consumer to tell whether the system's working or not. Right. So the value of a manometer changes drastically the minute you walk out of that home.
Yeah.
And so it's easy enough for you to tell. And of course, typically a crawl space, you don't have any problems with high pressure or anything. It's just it's funny. I went to do a school one time and I was a little bit intimidated, but it was a big grade school built in the 40s or 50s, a junior high school. And I get there and I'm like, well, this is going to be tough. How am I going to figure this out? And I get there and the maintenance guy walks up to me and he says, they did tell you this school is 100% crawl space, didn't they? And it was a huge school. And I'm like, no, they didn't. But one side of me said, great. I don't have any challenges of how to get the numbers down, so the advantage of the crawl space, but it was just thousands of square feet of crawl space, which was a challenge in itself. So when we go to an accessible crawl, I'm still a believer in valves. I'm still a believer in radon barrier film. There's still people out there trying to get away with Home Depot Visqueen. And I think we just had a meeting for Illinois for some new statutes. And I thought I heard somebody say the national statute's going to tighten up a little bit on that and ask for something that is a better product than that. So I didn't catch it all, but I'm a believer in using something more than what you can get off the shelf at Menards and Home Depot. That's arguable with some people, but I've never used that type product, and still a believer in it. I make the comment to people all the time, when you get done with a crawl space, it should be capable of holding water like a swimming pool liner. And I know that's an exaggeration, but we believe in the radon barrier film, stuff that's made for the industry. So we believe in the film, this is the laminated film, the cross laminated. We believe in the tape. We believe in the caulk that's recommended for barrier film is at least the barrier film, the Durascreen barrier film we carry. The caulk that's recommended is butyl. Butyl's still one of the cheaper caulks. So I see not a lot of reason. There's a lot of good things out there now, and that the caulking and gluing industry changes daily, but they still recommend butyl caulk. Butyl's still $2 more than it was 2 years ago, but it's still $5.40 or something. So I recommend overlapping the seams 12 inches. Another hint that I might throw out there, all of us watching this, I believe, do crawl spaces and no crawl spaces, but I thought maybe I could throw some hints at. Oftentimes in central Illinois, we have a high water table, farm country here. And if we see any indication that there's been any moisture in that crawl space, you can always tell on the walls because it'll be stained. And we make sure that our film is ran up that particular wall higher than any stain we've ever seen. But also, if we're any concern at all that there's a time that water table may rise in that crawl space, you were talking earlier, one of us were talking earlier about the perforated tile. We use that under every tape seam or under every seam because water's not going to go through radon barrier film, but it is going to find a way eventually to go through a tape seam. So what we do is we run perforated tiles cheap. The black plastic tile it's still cheap even in this world. But we found a great value in running a length of that under every tape seam in a large crawl space, so that if water ever does rise in that crawl space, it has to rise 4 inches before it can penetrate the weakest point, which is the tape joint. And so I thought maybe that was a hint for any of you that have been in a crawl space that you were concerned about the water. Nothing more depressing than having a consumer call you back and say, well, there's water on top of your radon material and I want you to come clean it off. Well, by then it's mucky water that you got to use rags and a shop vac to get off. Well, just think about it, guys. If you have if you have all of the weak spots, which is nothing, the seams is all your weak points. If you have those elevated 4 inches higher than the floor, then if their water table gets higher than that, once again, they have a problem with their home. Not the radon guy, that's a home problem, but that's a hint. When we think there's been any water in a crawl space, we kind of change the pattern of how we do things. And so anybody got any questions?
Yeah,
yet?
so David, so if let's say you don't have water there, are you just doing vapor barrier and you're not putting perforated pipe?
Good, very good question. It depends on the size of the crawl space, but if the crawl space is, say, just to throw a number, if the crawl space is 300 square feet or more, we will run a length of perforated tile, say down the middle or 20 feet from the edge. Whatever it does to, you're going to get communication either way, but you can improve the communication by running tile. I don't believe it's necessary in a smaller crawl space. The behind the garage 200 square feet crawl space, I don't believe it to be necessary. If you do your barrier film right, the radon's really not going to get through it anyway.
Do you use any gravel around the pipe at all, or just
No, not at all. But I also want to, here's what we do. The very first class I went to 26 years ago, a guy showed film of a crawl space he did. And I came from the carpentry world where when you did somebody's kitchen or bathroom, it either had to look perfect or they weren't going to give you a check. So I came from a world that had to be very meticulous. And I watched this film, and this guy ran a piece of pipe, a PVC pipe, horizontally under the barrier film and cut a slit for that pipe. And then he used tape, he used a whole bunch of caulk, foam, everything in the world to seal that slit around the pipe. And I thought, well, no, that doesn't look very permanent, nor does that look like it's just not very good looking. And I said, I'm not going to do that. So the very first crawl space I did, I went home to think about it. And I told the guy I would be back the next day because I just needed to think about it. I couldn't do that. And so lo and behold, we went home and made a platform. And the platform was a round treated plywood with a 3 5/8 hole in the middle that we screwed down to a couple pieces of 12-inch long pieces of perforated footing tile so we could go vertically into that crawl space. And so we never did go horizontally, but I will tell you, over the years, all of those I went into that had that slit cut horizontal entry, every one of them had a problem. They were broke loose somewhere. So we make a platform now. It's not as a sales pitch, but this is what we do now. And you can see the edges. All we're trying to do is elevate the entry to the crawl space. So this sits like this on a crawl space floor. And then we provide 2 discs with it. It's kind of a cool thing. And these discs, one of them is for 2-inch pipe, and it fits very tight on a 2-inch pipe, that 2.5 inch. And one of them is for 3-inch pipe. It's 3.5 inches. And so it gets threaded onto the pipe before you run your vertical piece into here. And then it comes down. Of course, your film is on top of the platform. Then it comes down and seals the film to the platform. So in other words, we're going to run the platform over. We're going to cut our little bitty hole for our pipe. And then we're going to thread this on the pipe, glue it in, and then we're going to bring this down and screw and caulk it so that this serves as the seal between the pipe and the barrier film. And then you never have, this is so tight onto the pipe that there's no leaks. It's permanent and there's no leaks. But I wanted to mention that because we were talking, this is really a cool deal, and we sell it very inexpensive. It comes with either size disc, because some crawl spaces in a combination crawl space basement, we typically use 2-inch pipe for the crawl space only. That's a matter of choice. We can talk about that matter of distributing the fans power. But the other thing about this is we tell people are tempted to take their perforated tile that they're using in their crawl space. They're tempted to run it underneath this platform to extend their communication, and that's not a good idea. keep it away from the platform, because if you run it underneath, you start restricting the flow, because the perforated pipe itself isn't near as valuable as the triangles on each side of that pipe. In other words, if you can imagine you're looking underneath a piece of radon barrier film, it's got the barrier film raised 4 inches, but each side of that piece of pipe is a void. I call it the triangle on each side of the pipe. Each side of the piece of pipe, if you got this, there's going to be where the film goes down is going to be an air void. If you run your pipe too close to this hole, you don't get to take advantage of that. There's much more cubic inches, cubic feet of airspace in the void on each side of this pipe than there is in the pipe itself. Because the pipe itself just has slots, and it's open on the end, but it just has slots on the way. But you've got this triangle void on each side of your communication pipe. So you always want to run it close to the platform, but never underneath this hole. And you run your pipe that you're feeding your radon system only through the platform a few inches, because you want it to simply find its way to your communication pipe. So that sometimes I think I tend to complicate things, but this makes it extremely easy, extremely neat looking. And I've got customers, my guy in Alaska, Ron, it's so expensive to ship things to him that I ship things to him in pieces that way, and he makes his own. So, and as I said, we made them for many years with treated 3/4 inch plywood that was cut the same size with the pieces of scrap tile screwed down until we decided that it was such a good idea that we would find something we could sell to our customers. And so we started making it out of plastic with, so anyway.
Sorry, David, just a question on that. So you're basically putting that, let's say, right on top of dirt?
Yes.
And then what is connecting to the ends of the perforated pipe are you connecting the perforated pipe directly? No. You're not.
No, you want to run it. This is very important. You want to run it up pretty close to the platform, but you do not want to run it underneath the platform. That way you keep your communication as good as it can possibly be. Your communication will happen on each side of that pipe. You got a round pipe going through. Each side of it has a totally open void. Now, granted, when you create suction that sucks down, that doesn't mean it's still got a nice opening. Your perforated tile that you run from the platform or from your suction point, however you do your suction point, has still only got slots. The only place it's going to communicate really good is the very end that's open. But the area on each side of that, because that pipe elevates the film, it creates a void on each side of it. It creates a really open void on each side of it. That's the valuable point more than your tile. And that's where people miss it. I have people call me all the time that have run the tile underneath the platform, and they've got a kind of a high manometer for a crawl space or something. And I'll say, well, how did you do that? And it always has to do with the fact that I've done some research with new construction, for instance. You run a T under the floor, that's all you get is 3 inches.
Yeah.
But if you run that tile close to that platform, you gain the advantage of the open cavity on both sides of that tile that's created the entire length of that tile.
Hey, David, I am trying here real quick. I want to look and see. I had a video that we shot with Brian years ago. I was looking to see if I could pull that up, and can everybody see that right here on my screen?
There's the old wood platform. Sometimes we just use scraps of PVC to elevate it. Yes.
So the idea there, and this is actually a 360 degree. If you're ever on the YouTube channel, you can actually grab and move this around, and you can actually see You know, in this one, you actually had is this a perforated?
Yes, yes. And I think in those days, we made sure it was on one side or the other. So in
Yeah.
other words, it either replaced the elevation piece on the one side of the platform. So in other words, we used a one piece of PVC to hold up the other one side. We used that piece of tile to hold up the other side. It's even better if you do it like this and have your perforated tile only come to the face of this. So things that you've gotten better with it in time. Thanks for that, Ben, because
Yeah, I think this is at least 7 or 8 years ago that we shot this one. So you know, changes since then.
yeah, yeah. And so I guess that then the last thing is the combination. As I say, in my area, combination crawl space basements are just rampant. And we always use a valve once again. And of course, we have them in 2 and 3 inch. And, you know, the ball valves are about half the price, I swear. But ball valves will whistle. Ball valves are a little bit harder to adjust just the flow. So I like using these gate valves, but they are a little more expensive. But we always use a valve because my theory is if I've got, let's just say we've got a tough communication, a basement that does have a lot of clay or sand. So we're having to struggle pretty hard to remove radon from that basement. And then we add a crawl space that's totally open. That has a tremendous amount of communication. I don't want, if my fan's capable of 200 cubic foot of air a minute, I don't want 180 of that coming from this crawl space that has all the ability to do that. And so we typically, as primitive as this sounds, we leave the valve closed on a combination home, look at the manometer, and open the valve till it only influences the manometer less than 1/4 of an inch. That's just a general rule. As primitive as that sounds, it works all the time for us. So we know that we want the crawl space. It doesn't, I tell people when I'm presenting, I tell people, look, if I have a properly done crawl space and I have a straw and a computer motor, we're going to get this radon fixed. And that's not necessarily true, but it's to make a point. It doesn't take a whole bunch to cure a crawl space. So you got to be careful when you're doing a combination because if it doesn't take much to do to mitigate a crawl space, then do it. Don't do it. Don't give it much. And so once again, what we typically do before we leave a job is we close the valve to the crawl space. Then someone's at the manometer, and then he tells that person to open that valve until it influences that manometer less than 1/4 inch, and then we walk away. And you still have the ability to adjust because you have a valve, but that seems to work an awful lot of the time.
So then, David, the question goes back to a few weeks ago then. So then do you base the fan based on the slab or based on the crawl space?
Very good question, because you have to base it on the slab because we're going to assume that the slab is the contributor.
Yeah.
And if you're in a combination home, most of the time the slab's bigger than the crawl space, not necessarily, but we know the slab is going to be more of a challenge from a communication standpoint because we know a properly done crawl space doesn't really have communication issues, but many times a combination home does have a challenge with the floor itself. And so I'm going to use an Eagle. I'm going to use some kind of a high suction fan, but all the more reason to valve the crawl space because just as I said, in very simple terms, if I got a fan that's capable of 200 cubic foot a minute and I got a floor that has communication problems, I don't want 180 of that coming from this crawl space that only needs a computer motor to solve anyway. So that's the value of a valve in a combination home. But I highly encourage any of you guys that are still trying to find a way to horizontally penetrate. This vertical thing looks a lot better. And this type of thing too, the other thing I like about this type of thing is you put it up, you put it down on the earth before you run your barrier film. And then you just put it approximately where you think it needs to be, and then you run your barrier film, and then you can literally reach and it slides around very easily, so you can get your precise fitting. So
Right.
you're within a foot or two or whatever, very easy to maneuver it till it's exact. And sometimes we dry fit our vertical piece of pipe, our 3-foot vertical piece of pipe, we dry fit it to get this in the exact location we want. Then we cut the radon barrier film out. And typically, after we cut the hole in the radon barrier film to accept our pipe through the platform, we'll go ahead and run a little bead of butyl caulk on the platform under the film we just cut. And then we do the same when we bring this down on top of it. We'll do the same around here, and typically 2 screws. Very simple, but also extremely valuable in quality, and never leaks, never fails. So you could make your owner do something, but I highly encourage it's a shame to do an excellent job on a crawl space and then blow it on the penetration.
One question, so I've always felt like, just from a common sense point of view, let's say you're putting perforated pipe onto dirt, so it's not really pulling air, and then you've got vapor barrier on top of it. So then therefore it's only pulling from the sides. I always thought you had to embed it in gravel because it's obviously more permeable.
Well, in my opinion, that's a whole bunch more work than any of us could do on a competitive nature. And why do you need to do it when the radon coming through the earth has no, it has nothing to block it to begin with. It doesn't have anything to block it.
Yeah.
Any radon coming through that earth is going to come through gravel the same as it's going to come through the earth itself. If you have a radon problem in a home and it's all crawl space, for instance, then all you're concerned with is removing what's coming through that earth. And you can dig a trench and fill it full of gravel, but I personally don't know what you're gaining other than creating a little bit better pathway for the radon to come in.
Right.
So you're only concerned with the radon that is coming to, great question, but you're only concerned with the radons coming through the earth. And
what size vapor barrier? You use 12 mil or use 6? I mean, it depends on the way the cross space is, right? If it's rigid or rocky.
well,
Yeah,
stronger. And that's another excellent question, because we'll carry in a sample of each. This happens to be the 6 mil, but we'll carry in a sample of 6 and 12 if we're doing a bid. And what we'll do is every bid is based on 6 mil film, and we tell them a little bit about the statistics, a lot better tear strength than, say, visqueen. So, but we also say for X amount of dollars more, we do have a product that's twice as thick, and will even serve you better for storage. And that X amount of dollars more, from a dollar standpoint, is sometimes surprisingly low to get you another $200 before you leave that crawl space and help pay the guy's wages. So we do always offer the 12 mils of film as a option film on a crawl space. Also, we overlap our seams by 12 inches, caulk the inner edge and tape the outer edge, so it's a double seam. That's a requirement in the state I live in, so I got used to it. But the national requirement's to overlap by 6 inches. After you've done it by 12 inches and required to do the double seam, you realize the value of it. It's pretty valuable. Also,
Go ahead there. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say something real quick.
Yeah.
Actually, what do you use to seal the vapor barrier to the walls? If it's stone, block, poured concrete, you have anchors and the caulk. You just caulk around the perimeter, or use tape, or what's the? So I've seen some people put like a foam board down, or
yeah,
spray foam.
yeah.
I mean, it's everyone's their own preference, but
Right.
what do you typically use
to
to secure the barrier to the walls?
We think that's just as important as anything else. I mean, I've been in plenty of crawl spaces where the barrier's fallen off the walls. And sometimes that's the wrong caulk. Sometimes it's failure of the right caulk. But we, over the years, we used to use 1x3s with Tapcons. And we've come around to using Christmas tree fasteners. We love them. But it's my opinion, it's important to use the caulk that's recommended by the barrier company, which is Butyl, because it's one of the least expensive caulks, but also this will hold a gutter corner together for 20 years. So why wouldn't it hold film up? But I have customers that say they run a generous bead of this and don't use any other kind of fastener. And I'm kind of a believer in using a fastener because it's the way I've always done it. But I also tell them, even if you don't believe in fasteners, at least keep a bag of these around. What are they? $8 for 100. At least keep a bag of these around for post, for unusual corners, for unusual splashings of concrete that you got to work around. There's always an unusual thing somewhere on a wall or a column in a crawl space. But I will tell you, even these are not nearly as effective if you cheat on how close you put them together. I'm a believer, if you're going to put one of these every 2 feet, you might be better off not buying them. I put one of these every foot, and I use them on the columns and stuff extremely fast. With these cordless hammer drills, it's so fast to drill a hole now. The SDS drill bits just last forever. You can drill one of these and tap it in there with a hammer so quickly, and it is pretty permanent. And once again, I would stress that I like using butyl caulk because I've seen the success on gutters for many, many years. Plus, it's one of the least expensive caulks. Plus, it's recommended by at least the manufacturer of the film I sell, the Durascreen. So there's a lot of pluses about it. There's other guys that say, "Oh, I've got a caulk that's better," and I'm all for it if it works for them, because I do understand it. In today's world, new products are just coming out right and left. So I think that everybody can do the details as long as you understand what we're trying to do. There's all kinds of ways you can cheat on the details to suit your own opinion about what's best. I can tell you that we like a vertical platform. We like overlapping our seams 12 inches. We like a caulk seal on the inside of that 12 inches, and the tape that's also made by the same company on the outside. So we got a double seal on seams. If there's any chance of moisture, we like to run perforated tile underneath a tape seam to elevate it. We like buttons, and we like to caulk the butyl caulk that's recommended by the manufacturer. If we're in a all crawl space home that's accessible, we like to put a T to bring a line up into the equipment room, so the homeowner has a more of an opportunity to look at the manometer, and you don't have to worry about mini helix or whatever on the outside. And I've always said, no matter what you use, how many people are going to go outside to look at their manometer? Or for that matter, one of these days we'll talk about alarms, which many of you know my opinion about that. But for that matter, who's going to go outside to look at an alarm? But I think that the big deal is we all have little different ways that we do things. But I've been in this industry so long that my opinion is, if you're trying to provide a quality product to the consumer, first of all, you're going to succeed. And secondly, many of us have slightly different opinions and variations on what we think is quality.
Yeah.
But the big thing is your opinion. What do you think gives your customer the best product for their money? And one of my least favorite sayings is, do it as if it's your own home, but it's really the best saying you can use because it's true. You ought to be able to do your customer's home the way you do your own.
Right.
And I believe we, as a mitigation company, we were reasonably successful. I I think the last year I sold my mitigation company almost 2 years ago, and the last year we were the largest in downstate Illinois, just barely, but we also did no real estate work. So how many people can say that? Well, it's all about designing your business, but we designed it around trying to build a reputation on doing the best job we could.
Yeah, David, speaking of that, so if I were to grade ourselves, our crawl space mitigations are extremely effective. We have a competitor that does crawl spaces where you could eat off the floor. Mine in comparison looks like I put the vapor barrier in with my feet. So we need to get a lot better at making them look better. They're very effective, but we're not great at making them look great. We've gotten a little better, but I don't know if you have any tips on that. This other company does them, and I don't know how they do it, but it's like pristine.
Well, a lot of crawl spaces we see is uneven, it's up
Sure.
rocks and
Sure.
debris and all this stuff in there, so it's not
Sure.
the easiest to work in, but it's a challenge. Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I feel like 6 mil is easier to work with than the 12. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I agree. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because first of all, I was gonna say, we always go down there and draw up a little map on the back of a piece of cardboard and go out and cut the film in the driveway, so that we've got the film pre-cut before we get in it. And then we lay it out as meticulously as possible and fold down the barrier along the walls so that we can run the caulk bead, then raise the portion up that's going to wrap the wall. And each crawl space has a different height that we go for, depending on the elements we're in. But I also I kind of I guess if you look at an advertisement from a dewatering company that does crawl spaces, and some of the crawl space films you see, I've always wondered, you can make a crawl space look really nice if you just do the bottom and cut it. Now you're just perfect, and you're not wrapping it up the wall. And that's typically what a dewatering company will do. And you can actually buy the film in 6-foot widths. So then you use another piece to wrap the wall, and you tape them or caulk them together. And I'm like, really, guys, that area is the weakest area of the whole crawl space for moisture. I think that it's important to remember that durability is much more important than looks. And so I encourage you not to leave a crawl space tight. We also tell people, feel free to use it for storage, but you're not going to use it for storage if you put it in there so tight and try to make it so pretty that as soon as they put pressure on it, it's going to pull away. But we encourage them to use it for storage, but we also tell them that they've got to use their head about it to put down underlayment, carpet, old piece of carpet, or even at least thick cardboard before they use it for storage. But you can't put, first of all, the ones that look perfect typically have a seam around the entire wall floor joint, which is where the moisture comes in at.
Yeah.
And I personally say I don't want a seam there, but you can make it look a lot better doing that. And also, if you make it tight, you can make it look better. But we just didn't worry quite as much about the look as we did the durability.
Yeah.
We get this false impression based on the advertising that, say, the dewatering companies do to make their product look good. And I agree, man. They make those crawl spaces look like you could just put the kids down there and drop some food down there once in a while and leave them for their lifetime. And so good questions, very good questions. Anybody else got any questions about anything having to do with a crawl space? All of us have done them. I just maybe have done them longer than most of us. I think that's about as much as I wanted to cover. Like I say, I like to do a map and cut it outside. get it laid out as good as possible. I think it saves
Yeah,
time in the long run.
we got a question real quick. Sorry.
Do you
Okay,
ever do like dehumidifiers and sump pumps in crawl spaces? Because like, what if we encapsulate a crawl space and it creates a new problem?
well, I didn't totally hear that question. You're a little far away, but I know the dehumidifiers, in my opinion, a lot of the companies that do dehumidification of crawl spaces, they run some very big, expensive dehumidifiers in them, but in my opinion, a radon system with a properly sealed barrier, where's the humidity coming from after that? Do we really have humidity? Most of my experience says no.
So it doesn't usually create a humidity problem.
You've eliminated the humidity because the humidity is coming from the earth. So you've eliminated if you properly do the crawl space, in my opinion. Now, sump pumps in crawl spaces are another challenge, and I can tell you what we do personally is if it's in a basin, if it's in some kind of we find them in everything from a 5-gallon bucket to whatever, but if it's in anything like a sump basin or crock that you'd see in a normal floor, we once again talking about treated plywood, we sometimes do this with the same sump lid material, but if you can envision treated plywood, what we call a donut ring, that you can cut and lay on top of the of the sump basin before you put your barrier film down. So it's laying on the earth, but it has an inner diameter that matches the sump pump basin. Okay, imagine that. So you cut a piece of plywood. Let's say your sump basin typically is around 18 inches. So you got your outer part of this donut, 24 inches, and you got your inner part 18. You lay it down before you do your barrier film, and just keep it right at over that basin itself. Okay, so then you go ahead and do your radon film and do your entire job, but you have to cut out for the sump pump and everything. So you're technically cutting out the barrier film that's the inner diameter of that entire basin. You're cutting out your radon barrier film. You're cutting out a round piece of that's 18 inches. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you do your work, and you have a second platform or donut cut out of treated plywood, and you put on top of the barrier film, and you screw the two halves together. So now you got your barrier film sandwiched between two donuts, and then you can put a sump lid on it just like you would any other basement floor. So in other words, you're creating a floor in order to work from. And you got to remember that I've seen a lot of things done in crawl spaces that make that sump pump kind of inaccessible.
Yeah.
All kinds of things that people try to do, but you need to make it as accessible as you do in a basement because it needs access. It's a mechanical piece of equipment that needs access. So if you do something to create a platform before you put the film down to duplicate, say, what a concrete floor would be, which is a piece of plywood. If you do something before the film and then you duplicate that above the film, then you just screw the two halves together, and you've got your barrier film sandwiched between these two donut rings, and then it's ready to mount a standard sump lid to the upper plywood ring. Makes a beautiful setup. It's almost something, I don't know, Ben, if we show that in one of our films or not, but just makes a beautiful picture for a crawl space application. And there's maybe guys here that have some other things they do, but that's what we've always done, and just very accessible, looks good, works good, very sealed. So
do you I'm going to ask a very obvious question, but because I get asked it by clients all the time, do you ever encapsulate a dirt crawl space with high radon and not install a fan?
No, it's kind of, if you've identified high radon, then you're kind of bound to do it. But the other thing that you guys will see or have seen is we get in crawl spaces that between the radon gas and the other soil gases and the air infiltration, they blow up like Jiffy Pop popcorn. Most of you guys are old enough to remember Jiffy Pop popcorn.
Yeah.
I've just gone to lunch before I've hooked the fan up and come back from lunch and seen the barrier film clear up to the floor joist. So are you willing to take that chance? As soon as you hook a fan up, it sucks back down. But it's funny because in that situation, you can have it laid out just as pretty as you can get it. But once it blows up, it loses all of its shape and everything else. And when it comes back down, you're like, wait a minute, this was a whole bunch prettier before I went to lunch. But there's been many times that that before we've got a fan up and running, the crawl space starts ballooning. And sometimes it does the ballooning up and down, sometimes it just goes up. But there's a to me, one of the excuses to always use a film, as well as you're curing a lot of things. You guys have been around long enough. I laugh because many times my part of the country has a lot of these 1950s, 60s homes that have crawl space combinations or crawl spaces. And almost every time we did a crawl space, we would hear three things afterwards. The next morning, the housewife would call us and say, well, now, David, I have a question for you. My house has had that old house smell for 40 years. And today when I woke up, there was no old house smell anymore. Bam. They don't know what to attribute it to. But I always say, you guys been in crawl spaces enough to know there's a lot of bad things about a crawl space besides radon. A lot of bad soil gases, a lot of things associated with moisture that are bad. But we fix a lot of things besides radon in a crawl space. The other thing that you will hear is people will tell you after they've had it for a while, they say, look, I keep pretty good track of my utility bills. After you did my crawl space, my utility bill went down considerably. Well, guess what? You have cold air coming through that crawl space floor all winter and humidity coming through it all summer. Both of those are horrible on a utility bill. And so it's pretty easy to tell people, look, I can lower your energy bills. I can improve your air quality. So two big things. I already forgot the third one. It's getting late in the week. But that's two things that I think sometimes it's pretty easy for us to forget the benefits of doing a crawl space above and beyond. You've taken away the humidity, you've taken away the cold air that comes through it. You've closed off those vents and taken away the cold air. I also tell people, look, if you're worried about cold air on your feet, all you got to do is you've got all your ductwork running down there. Take one end of the crawl space and cut into the ductwork and put a vent, a supply vent, and take the other end and put a return air vent. And sometimes even the heating guys will say, well, that sounds like a big energy loss. And I'm like, how could it be an energy loss? You're warming up the house. But I'm a believer that after I've been in crawl spaces for 25 years, I would never, ever live in a house space above a crawl space. And I think I mentioned in one of my sessions that the second house I ever did back in 1998 was a man that was restricted to a wheelchair, and he never went out. He lived his life above a crawl space and just really basically never moved. He was in his wheelchair and he was mobile enough. He wasn't that old of a man, and even slept in that room and died of lung cancer. We test above that crawl space and he's got real, the numbers like 20 or 25 above the crawl space, because crawl spaces have a history of elevating radon that way. And this guy dies above his crawl space because that's where he lived. Well, there's a whole bunch of things we can do for people's home environment. I mean, how many of you have come out of a crawl space and felt about half sick? You know, I'm the kind of guy that's been sick 3 times in my life and I don't remember when it was, but I've come out of a crawl space feeling pretty puny because we don't really know what we're breathing in a crawl space. So I'm a full believer that they should be outlawed. Nobody should be living above a crawl space, and how many people are sleeping above them and everything else. So
Yeah, I agree.
As a tester, when I would go into a house with a crawl space, before, like when I walked in the door, I'd just be like, yeah, you've got high radon. I appreciate you paying me, but yeah, we'll just go on record right now that you've got high radon. And honestly, I would tell people, whether it comes back high or not, even if it's close, I'm like, you've got to encapsulate. Like, it's worth the money, it's worth the time, having somebody that does it well. And you know, you can regain that space for storage if you're using a superior vapor barrier. I think that's the biggest sales pitch that I would give to people. But I would just, and a lot of people are David talked about like that old house smell. A lot of people are used to the smell of their house, but when you walk in and you just get that musty, moldy smell, it just goes away. And that, I mean, that is the sales pitch right there. And that is a tangible thing that people can actually get excited about for what you're selling. Nobody cares about radon, but having either the storage space or the smell go away, or just knowing that you're not breathing in all that air that's coming up and making you sick, that's a huge selling point.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
any other questions? Comments?
David, you didn't think we'd be able to go over 15 minutes on Crawlspaces?
Well, well, I was even more worried about talking about dewatering systems. Ben wanted to talk about what to do with the dewatering systems, and I see people like Bruno. Bruno says he's never done a sump basin because Utah doesn't seem to have enough water problems that they have sump basins. So I'm sure that people like Bruno also don't have dewatering systems to deal with, but some of us have those heartbreakers in seemingly a third of the homes we do. So we'll touch on that one of these days. So we'll and you guys can also let us know what you want to talk about. And I fully believe this to be a chat. I always tell people I have a lot of years of experience, but my benefit is in the fact that I have friends all over the United States that I get to hear their nightmares and their problem homes and their issues too. And I learn a whole bunch more from my customers than I ever knew. So my hope is that I can share stories based on what I learned from them. It also allows me to do something that no one else in this meeting can do, and that is have a better understanding. I touched on this last week, what topography does, and how I just laughingly mentioned Bruno not having sump basins. There's times when I spend more time trying to seal up a sump basin than I do building a radon system. And so my point is and we'll touch on sumps one of these days if you want. We got a million miles of sump pumps, but the point that I'm making is I have the advantage of talking to people in all topographies. As Ron from Alaska to Atlanta, Georgia to New York and Maine, and we get to talk to everybody. But the first thing I'll say is radon techniques are governed by topography. So when we touch on a subject that doesn't affect your topography, it's still interesting. Still interesting to me. The whole subject's interesting to me, and so you guys let us know if there's something that you want to touch on, because heck, it's just a discussion hour, and we look forward to doing it again next week. We're going to switch to 3 o'clock, right, Ben?
Well, that was going to be my next question. We had a pretty good turnout today. How's everybody feel about this being an hour later than we normally do? We've also, David and I talked about, first thing in the morning on Fridays, but I know a lot of you guys are wrapping up your jobs and you're back in the office and this works. So what do you guys think about this time?
Everybody, I think that 3 o'clock may work. 2 o'clock wasn't working for me because I'm part of the packaging and shipping crew, and we have all the shippers coming to pick up stuff at 3. And something about Fridays is all you guys wait till the end of the day Friday and say, oh my gosh, I gotta have some stuff for early next week. I better call Dave Smith. And so sometimes the packaging and shipping department, we'll call it, being mostly me and my daughter, sometimes they were really missing me. So the 2 o'clock just wasn't working anymore for me. But
Yeah,
3
throw
o'clock.
it in the chat if you if this is better, or Nick says 3 beats 2 o'clock, but either works. And obviously if you guys miss the call, then it's working in Facebook, so you can see that immediately following. And then I have to manually upload it to YouTube, so that usually takes me a few days by the time I go through. But you can find it there. We obviously we want to find a time that works really well for everybody, because I think the more people that we have on here, that does give us the opportunity to have Q&A and get other people's opinions and see what's working for some people. Obviously, the takeaways from today are just move somewhere without crawl spaces and sumps, and find that place in the country and go there. Bruno is saying no, stay at home, stay where you're at. He doesn't want the competition.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get my weekend started, everybody. So thanks for participating, and we'll talk to you next week or sooner.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. We'll
Thanks.
see you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.